Greetings and welcome back. Now, in between videos, I did get rid of all of the extra layers, getting us all the way back down to our little fundamental stick figure. So if you need to go ahead and do that before you follow along from the last video where we were talking about blending options, by all means do that. Now, let's jump into our layer style window, which again I'm going to do just by double-clicking on our layer itself. And let's take a look at our options once again. I have my fill opacity set back to 100%, opacity to 100, blend mode at normal. I don't really care too much about the knockout settings at the moment. What I want to focus on are these 5 checkboxes. Now notice that 2 of these are switched on by default. They are blend clipped layers as group and transparency shapes layer. I want to go ahead and talk about those first, only because they are on by default. So if we hold down Alt and we reset everything and we set our knockout to none, you'll notice that my blending options switch over to default, and you still see that these checkboxes are on. This is just how things are kind of intended to be. First off, blend clipped layers as a group. How does this work and what is it doing? To really show this off, I need to bring in at least one more image. So I'll go to File and Place, and we'll bring in our koala this time. Hold down Alt and Shift and scale that up. Now, you see that the koala is right on top of my stick figure. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click right on the dividing line between the stick figure and koala layers, and that's going to turn the stick figure into the base of a clipping mask for the koala. And you see the result here. The transparency of that stick figure is being used to kind of punch out some transparency for our koala. Now, if we take our fill opacity and I start playing with it, you'll notice that the entire thing, the koala image in the background and all, is fading in and out. If I switch off blend clipped layers as a group, you no longer see this. The reason you don't see any change at all is because what's happening is that the blue pixels that are actually underneath our koala layer are indeed fading in and out. If I set this down to 50% or something close to 50%, click OK, and then hide my koala layer, you'll notice we have a 50% transparent set of pixels directly underneath. What this checkbox is doing is saying, go ahead and consider all of the pixels of the clipping masks, or any sort of layer on top of this that is being clipped as a part of a clipping mask. Treat all of that as a singular object, a single group, and then we will fade that in and out as we play with the fill opacity. So it's just a way for you to say, all right, anything that's involved in the clipping mask, treat it like one individual object. Next, we have transparency shapes layer, and to show that off, let me go ahead and click OK here, and we'll get rid of our koala. I'm going to do that just temporarily by Alt-clicking on the divider again to make that no longer part of the clipping mask, and then I'll just hide the koala layer so we can bring it back if we need it for any other demonstrations down the road. So, transparency shapes layer. This is going to determine what your layer effects look like based on the transparency of your layer. Now, 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100 actually, you're going to want to leave this checkbox on. And here's what it does. Let's put an outer glow on. So I'll click on outer glow. And right now we won't see an outer glow because by default its settings are white or some very pale color, and then it's set to screen. So it's trying to brighten our white background, which does us no good whatsoever. I'm going to change that by clicking on my little tiny color swatch here and dragging this over to black. Click OK. Now, a setting of black with a blend mode of screen, again, does nothing at all. So let's go to screen and set the blend mode to normal. And a little tiny glow just appeared on the outside. And it's not even a glow. It's just kind of like a black dusting that's radiating out from our layer. It's very, very hard to see, though, because we have a pretty high resolution image here that's only being viewed at 50%. To help make it more apparent, I'm going to take the size and increase it out. And as I kind of waggle that slider back and forth, you can see what's going on. It's not the prettiest effect in the world, but it is getting the job done, which is all we really needed to do. Going back over to the blending options, we have our transparency shapes layer checkbox. What this is essentially saying is that the transparent pixels that surround our layer are being used to control the shape of that outer glow layer style, or any other layer style that we might have applied. If I turn off the transparency shapes layer, suddenly it seems that our outer glow completely disappears. That's because technically this would exist on the outside of the document. If I grab inner glow and I play with this, we should get nothing from this as well. But we'll see. Let me play with it. There we go. Yeah, we don't get any results from this either. And that's because there is nothing constraining the shape. For the inner or outer glows to work, some sort of shape has to be defined, like a boundary edge that we can glow outside of or inside of based on whether we're using an outer glow or inner glow, respectively. Without that shape, we get nothing. So we have to leave transparency shapes layer on if we want these effects to be able to show up. So now you'll see that my little guy here is very dark because that inner glow is indeed being calculated because we now have a boundary to base that off of. So I hope that makes sense. Really, again, it's just deciding whether or not transparency is going to shape out those effects. Now, obviously, I think you can see why these should generally be on at all times. Most of the time, you'll want your clip layers to be considered a single object. Otherwise, there's almost no point in clipping the layer. Almost. I mean, it's kind of like having an alpha channel. And then, as far as transparency shapes layer go, if you have that off, most of these layer styles are pretty useless. So you're going to want to leave that on most of the time. Okay, blend interior effects as a group. This only refers to certain effects, such as the inner glow, believe bevel and emboss. I know all of the overlays. If you have a hard time remembering, and I do, just go ahead and mouse over this, and the tooltip will remind you. So there you go, glow, satin, and overlay. Now here's how this works. First off, I'm going to turn off my glows, at least for a moment. Now let's do something else. Let's grab our inner glow, and I'm going to change the setting to something a little more exciting. Let's set this to a brighter color, and now it is like the inside of that is glowing. We could set that over to screen, though it's not going to change things too much because of the colors that we've chosen. Now, if we leave this off... Ooh, I'm sorry, you know what? I changed my mind. I've got to set that back over to black, and that's still got to be kind of normal, otherwise we won't be able to see it against the white background, so pardon me. Got a little excited there. If we leave blend interior effects as group off and we play with our fill opacity, check out what happens. The individual pixels of our stick figure do indeed become transparent, just like we expect them to. However, the interior effect of that inner glow doesn't. If we switch this on and we play with our fill opacity, everything blends out together. That's because that interior effect, that inner glow, is being calculated as if it was part of the single object of our little stick figure itself. So if I pull that to 50% off and start switching that on and off, you can see the result. So there's with it blended separately, and there it is blended with the rest of our stick figure. Next, we have layer mask hides effects and vector mask hides effects. I'm only going to demonstrate the layer mask hides effects because vector mask does the exact same thing. It's just determining whether or not you want to do it if you have a vector mask applied. So we'll click OK, get out of here for a moment, and we need some sort of a layer that has a layer mask. To make one of these, I think the easiest way that I can think of would be to just drop down a solid color layer. So I'm going to do that by going down to the Add Adjustment Layers button. Come up and click on Solid Color. And let's grab a darkish green. I'm going to do a few fairly fancy things. I'm going to click on that layer mask, so that little white square that appeared next to our color fill. I'm going to hit Control-I, and that will invert that mask, making it completely black. Now I'm going to paint on the layer mask in order to give us something to look at. So let's hit X to reverse my color, so I am painting white instead of black. And this is where, if you don't fully understand masks, your noodle will be a little baked right now. By painting white onto the mask, we are defining where the color green will appear. So if you're sitting there thinking, why is he painting white and getting green? That's because I'm on a green fill layer and I'm adding some white to that layer's mask, saying that I want the color green to appear in those white pixels of the mask itself. Now with that done, I can jump back into my layer style just like I have been before. And we have layer mask hides effects and vector mask hides effects. Let me put on a drop shadow. And I'll pull this kind of out to the side, and we'll increase its size a little bit. It looks a little cheesy, but it'll get the job done. I mean, you can see that there is indeed a shadow there. If I pull my fill opacity down, check out what we get. We get kind of this interesting effect that looks like either a white piece of something is floating over our background, or that we just have some sort of magic shadow that has a hole in it. It's very cool to be able to paint like that as well, because you can paint shadows underneath things if you've never played with that. Now, what I'm going to do, though, is take our layer mask hides effects and switch that on, and you'll notice that the shadow disappears. And that's because the layer mask is now getting rid of that effect. Now, if we do a couple of things here, If we go over to like drop shadow, and let's see here, if we have a little switch in here that says layer knocks out drop shadow. If I check this on, here's what we get. We're no longer punching a hole in our shadow. And as I play with my fill opacity, you can kind of see the result there. It basically means that that little hole that we had before doesn't exist. Now, if I switch on layer mask hides effects, we're getting kind of a different result. That's because that shadow is existing only inside the realm of our mask. So again, the whole idea here is whether or not that layer mask is kind of hiding that effect away. Most of the time, I find myself not really reaching for this, but it is there in case you need it. It's one of those things where it's like it's not on by default, and there's probably a reason for that. Vector mask hides effects does the exact same thing. It's only going to do it when you have a vector mask applied. So it's the same idea, just applied to having a vector mask on the background. It's just whether or not you want to be able to see an effect out, within the realm of the mask itself. So that takes us all the way through those 5 checkboxes for advanced blending. Now I'm going to go ahead and call the video here, and then in the next video we'll take a look at these blend if options. So we'll be right back.